I know we're doing like 2 takes here. You're not reading. Leslie this morning was the moderator on 2 panels, and we're honored to be. I'm honored to be on the moderator on this next panel with 2 brilliant, smart, different, diverse panelists. So to lay the stage just a little bit, the topic, of course, is next generation women leaders, and we're planning to. The whole idea is that we have more and more opportunities which are opening up outside the United States. Women are going global at an earlier age, and we hope to explore the experiences and interests in these next generation women. We will look at it both from the US and the international perspectives. We will also explore what's being done at the university level to better prepare women for global leadership roles, and speak with Jennifer about her work in the international visitor fields. So just to lay a little bit of the background, as I did on the other panel, there's a lot of debate on the next generation women leaders. You know, we all heard the phrases this morning about the glass ceiling, shattering it, moving beyond. We've often heard growing up, you know, it's a man's world. I hope it's all historical and isn't what we can say, but we still hear it from time to time. And I know, just to sort of make light vein, at one point, if you remember, even as I know we talk about like the huge, suddenly the accelerated growth, I think was the phrase you used, in the last 25 years that women have sort of grown. If you remember 25 years ago, the outfits, it wouldn't look like what we are wearing today. It would be mostly a pantsuit with like a shirt with like a little, like those bow tie thingies that we all had. But luckily, even back then, for all of the hype that we had, that women were supposed to dress like men, behave like men in order to be successful in the man's world, it did not require that we as women needed to incorporate necessarily every single obnoxious behavior associated with men, like thumping around or using expletives or standing with our, sitting with our legs spread, or speaking on the phone with our legs on the desk, or just boasting of sexual conquest with the opposite sex. Women, even back then, even though we were trying to behave like men, we never crossed completely into that. So it was like a part of it, but not really the other part, which is power and prestige. So at this time, the next generation of women leaders, really, I think we have the luxury to be more of who we are intrinsically. We heard all morning from each of the different panelists and the panels about how women look at the world differently, how we think differently. And so the focus really is not being a woman or being a man, but really, as Christine just talked about, competency of developing your leadership skills. Research on women and leadership actually has now started a little bit of the focus on the fact that the brain of men and women are different. While doing research for this panel, did you know that scientists have found that the male brain is apparently 9% larger than the female brain? This certainly does not mean that women are smarter than men, because remember that scary guy, he had a really big head and a big brain. That doesn't mean that they're dumber or more brilliant. The difference really is that the brain cells are apparently packed more densely in women. In comparing the 2 brains, research confirms certain differences that we have always known for centuries, that women are better at expressing emotions and remembering details. The brain circuitry for language and observing emotions is also larger in the female brain. So, as we just said, instead of fighting one's natural instincts, women simply need to embrace who we are and what we've always been about. And we've often talked about emotional intelligence as being a very important factor. There are books, till 10 years ago, we didn't even know the term emotional intelligence, maybe 20 in the circles among the professors and the teaching. But now, being emotionally intelligent is very much taken. To me, competence is sort of the bedrock, the foundation to be able to go to the next level. But after that, you still have to have all the other characteristics and being able to lead. And so we talked also earlier today about being more collaborative and democratic as leaders, instead of the directive style top-down leadership associated with the male brain. We actually have a huge advantage, as I said, in being able to play a greater leadership role because of our inherent advantages. So I'll tell you what, I've got a ton of research, but I really think we're here to enjoy and learn and hear stories. So I'm going to have Dr. Ann Anderson from Notre Dame share a little bit about her background and the work she does and how she's gotten to this point. Ann?
Thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you all. It's fantastic to be here. I'm Ann Henderson. I'm the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at Notre Dame of Maryland University, and our motto is educating women as leaders to transform the world. So I feel like I'm really in the groove here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart and also near and dear to what I do at Notre Dame. I also serve as a consultant for the United States Institute of Peace, where I do my primary work in the field of conflict resolution. And I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about how I spend my professional life today doing something that I really hated and feared when I was young. And that's negotiating. Because my field is international conflict resolution. And I've spent my life working in conflict zones for the United Nations, for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, for the United States Institute of Peace, trying to bring warring parties to the table to make peace. I've worked in the former Yugoslavia during and after the terrible civil war that occurred there in the 1990s, in the former Soviet Union, in Iraq after the American invasion, when the nation was torn by ethnic and religious strife. I've worked in Rwanda, which experienced a horrifying genocide in the 1990s, in Somalia, which has lived in a state of clan-based violence for the last 20 years. But none of this came naturally to me. Because for the first 25 years of my life, I was profoundly conflict avoidant. I hated the pressure-cooker world of high-stakes negotiating. And this is actually not uncommon if you look at the research. There are a lot of women who report being uncomfortable negotiating, especially if they're negotiating with men. And I'm just kind of curious, out here in the audience, how many of you feel that flutter of apprehension when you have to go into a high-stakes, win-lose negotiating situation? Do we have any people out there who get a little apprehensive about that? Good, so maybe you'll know a little bit what I felt like. Because when I was young, I thought I could be successful without negotiating, just relying on my merit, which I expected others to recognize. And so, this worked for a while. I applied to Harvard, just sent away my application in the mail, folded it up, sent it in, got back a letter, you're coming to Harvard, great, no negotiating. Got into Yale University for my PhD program, again, paper application, no negotiation. I'm like, okay, I can do this. That's good. But then I applied for a Fulbright grant to do dissertation research in Hungary and Yugoslavia. This was back during the communist era, which some people in the audience may possibly remember, before 1989. And I had to experience for the first time direct hand-to-hand negotiating combat, in the sense that I had to interview for the Fulbright against a whole bunch of other contenders. So the interviews were in New York. There's a big room full of like 20 graduate students, all hoping for that chance. We're all aiming for just a handful of Fulbrights in Central Europe. And I looked around at the competition, and my heart sank. There was this one guy who was sitting there exactly the way you would describe it, Sheila. I mean, he had like his legs wide open, and his hands were back on his seat, and he was holding forth about how fabulous he was, and all the great things that he had done, and all the great things he was going to do in Hungary when he got the Fulbright grant. I'm like, okay, I'm done. There's no way I can compete with this guy. So he went in, he had his interview, he came out, he looked cocky. Yeah. Then I went in. I was trembling so hard that I had to take my seat instantly, so that I wouldn't actually appear to have St. Vitus's answer or something like that. And then they started asking questions. I got a little more confident, talking about my research. And then they said, tell us about your research budget and what you're going to need from Fulbright in terms of a budget to do your research. And I thought to myself, okay, the best way to do this is to just ask for as little as possible to show them how prudent and thrifty I am, and not ask for a lot. That's what I did. A little while later, I learned that I had the Fulbright. I was so excited. I went over to Hungary. I had asked for a research budget that was so small that I was living in a tiny room in the back of somebody's house, no indoor plumbing, had to use an outhouse in the back, had about $1 a day for food, ate a lot of bread, and I'm out of time, but I am going to finish the story because I'm not afraid anymore. So I had no money for any kind of cultural events. My idea of leisure was to go to Váci út, which was the big pedestrian street in downtown Budapest where the communist elite shot. There was this beautiful pastry shop there called Zsérbo, where if you were a Communist Party elite member, you could sit and have some cognac and some dobosh torts on the terrace. So I just like to look at it, I couldn't go there. But I went there, and who did I see sitting on the terrace but arrogant guy? Because he had apparently gotten a Fulbright too. And he was like, oh, Anne, come on over, have a seat, have some dobosh tort. I looked at the menu, it's like, okay, that costs more than I spent in 3 days. And I had to ask him, how can you afford to be here? He's like, oh, remember those interviews for the Fulbright? They asked me what kind of research budget I wanted. And I just named this outlandish figure because I figured they'd cut me back. But they gave it all to me. So I'm living right on the hog. This was my first and most powerful negotiating lesson. It's what I'll close with. I thought about that a lot, and it taught me 2 lessons. The first thing is that something that many of you as successful women negotiators already know, which is that in negotiation, you never get what you don't ask for. So ask for the most that you can reasonably justify. And secondly, you have to figure out what's most important to the other side so that you can frame your requests in a way that resonates with them. And I didn't think about that when I was negotiating for that first Fulbright. I didn't think, what do they want to hear? What are they looking for, and how can I convince them to give me what I want? Those 2 lessons have taken me through international conflict negotiation around the world. They've helped me work with and groom women to be successful international negotiators, and I'm looking forward to talking more about that in the question and answer phase, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Henderson. That was awesome. That was really amazing. We're going to have Jennifer Clinton come and share her personal story in approximately 3 minutes to make it fair, but come on over.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all hanging in there. We just have a little bit more time before lunch, so thanks for being here. Thank you to Deb and World Trade Center here. I'm Jennifer, and I'm just recently named as the president of the National Council for International Visitors in DC, where we work closely with the State Department on the International Visitor Leadership Program, working with about 95 different community organizations across the country, like the World Trade Center Institute, and helping them build capacity in their communities for internationalizing their communities. A little bit about me. I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a fairly large sort of Irish Catholic family, fairly traditional role models, mother, stay-at-home mom. I think 2 of my most sort of impactful experiences as a young person that have really informed my life now and my career has been being a middle child, so I'm one of 6. And as that, I was sort of a curse growing up because I felt like, maybe unlike Anne, I was constantly negotiating between my siblings and the older ones versus the younger ones, and this, this constant trying to bring together different perspectives and different sort of attitudes about family life. Secondly was I am a sort of a product of Title VII, which was the legislation that was passed in allowing for young women and girls to be active in sports and providing more funding at the collegiate level for women. And I was very much played basketball as at a very early stage in my life, and it really taught me critical lessons that I have brought to the business world to me now. It's really how to compete, how to work together as a team, how to work really hard and have a lot of discipline, and how to perform. And I was able to get a full scholarship to Murthy University to play basketball there, Division I school, and it really was an impressive experience. That those lessons that I learned very early on and through college, of all of those skills and competencies that I really rely on a daily basis in my work. So the theme of sort of that middle child working really hard has led me to my career now, where I've been involved in both international education, higher education, and international trade. And the common theme in all of those experiences that I've had is really about bringing different perspectives together to understand each other and to understand people from around the world. So one thing that I think, as I'm just turned 40, so I guess I would be considered a next generation leader. And one thing that I wanted to share with you in that experience and talking with friends of mine, colleagues of mine, that I think speaks to Deb's point of sort of that second stage of women is really figuring out the right role, the right model of being in the workforce. And I'm sort of seeing and have experienced a couple of different models that pros and cons to each. So the first one being, women you see who are very successful women in top executive roles, they don't have any kids. And what's interesting is that there's a statistic out there that says childless women in corporate America earn almost as much as men. Mothers with partners earn less, and single mothers much less. So it's interesting to see, being the top of the top, does it mean you can't have kids? The second model is women as a primary breadwinner, and Christine was talking about that earlier. So that's my case. I have a young child, and I'm the primary breadwinner, and I see pros and cons to that. I get sort of interesting, dirty looks from people around the table when I go to pay the bill, or from my family who are not very accepting of that model. So that's, pros and cons to that. The other model is you're seeing a lot of women actually my age leaving the workforce because they don't like the pressure, they have kids, and they need more flexibility, and so they're not necessarily finding that space. And there was a comment earlier about how it really depends on the individual, it really depends on the individual culture. And so that's really, I think, a very disappointing thing, because we've heard all today about the economic benefits of women being in the workforce. And then finally is women as entrepreneurs. So you're seeing really big statistics out there of women who are leaving the workforce and actually starting their own companies, which I think is great. And I think it empowers women and gives them a lot of economic and freedom to have families and do what they want. The only challenge with that is what happens if you're sort of still in the workforce. So, those models, where do we fit? Do we have to act like men? So that's one thing that I'm sort of struggling with as a young woman with a young family, of really finding my place and my space of what is the model that is sort of acceptable for me, acceptable for my friends and family. So interesting dynamics going on, and I think looking forward with respect to that for young people is, particularly young women coming out of college, numbers in college are much, much higher than they've ever been before. And so when they get to the work world, they're going to have to choose between these models, and I think we're all struggling to figure out what works the best, so that women can not just be in the workforce, but be in very senior level positions. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so for the next generation women leaders of the global scene, what are some of the challenges that you have observed in specific regions or specific countries for these women to feel and become and evolve into these next generation leaders in their respective regions or countries? Oh.
So I mentioned before that our organization, as Debs, works with about 5,000 international visitors that come to the U.S. for a 3-week visit. They're coming from all over the world, and particularly from emerging markets. And so you're seeing, I think that the beauty of the program is they're bringing groups from that come together as groups from all different countries, and they're able to experience each other's experiences as being emerging leaders in those countries. So that's definitely a benefit. I think they also have the opportunity to share their challenges, which are many that we've talked about today in terms of stereotypical sort of hierarchical systems in their countries, economic empowerment. So.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I'd just like to say a few things about college women in the United States today who are interested in careers in world affairs. Because I teach many of these students, and there's one critical thing that they really need, and that is actual international experience while they are in college. Now, when I was in college, a number of the students I went with went abroad for a semester. They went to look at art museums in Italy, or to go to the Folger Shakespeare Library, all of this great, high culture stuff. Today's world is a little different for many colleges because a growing number of women in college today are first-generation college students. And they don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to spend that wonderful, enriching year in Italy, sitting on the piazza and so forth. And one of the great challenges that I know we face at Notre Dame, and that many of my colleagues face at other institutions, is these young women who want so much to get international experience, to get their career started, but they don't know how it's going to be financially feasible for them. And it's critical. I work with and advise a lot of students, and I know from my work with nonprofits and internationals and in DC and other areas, places like Capital Relief Services, World Vision, they're looking for people with some international experience on them. How do you get that international experience? You need to start young. And so to pick up on the theme of philanthropy, I'd like to ask you to think about something. I'd like to ask you to think about your college, your alma mater, think about giving, and think about directing your giving to support study abroad and service abroad programs. Because if you do that, you will be making it possible for the next generation of women to get the international experiences they need to get their foot on the bottom rung of the ladder to move up in the international arena.
Thank you, thank you. To make it more personal, is it possible for either one or both of you to share maybe examples of how women, and I know you both have worked in several parts of the world in other countries, how women have approached challenges that they have dealt with in their regions and tried to overcome them to sort of try to reach some of these leadership positions or move ahead, because we have a whole sort of stereotypes in different countries that's completely different. On some levels, very similar, on other levels, completely different than what we have here in the U.S.
Most of my experience has been in Western Europe, so there's a lot of similarities with respect to our experience here in the U.S. Versus Western Europe. I'm trying to think of challenge how people have overcome them. I think about the social systems in Europe where there's a lot more care and ability for women to take a lot of time off to have kids. What's interesting about that, though, is that the statistics were actually, there are higher numbers. If you look at most of Western Europe, besides Sweden and Finland, most of the other countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the numbers of women in the labor force are actually lower. So it's just very interesting to see that dynamic where there is a much stronger social support system, yet there's not as much participation in the labor force, and in terms of the levels of pay are even lower in terms of equality between men and women. So it's a dynamic out there that I think is still a significant challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn to a different part of the world, the developing world, and share a story from Rwanda, where I was recently working with Rwandan peacekeepers who were preparing to deploy to a mission into Darfur, Sudan, which, as many of you know, has been racked by conflict for many, many years. I was going there to train these peacekeepers in some negotiating skills that they could use when they deployed in Sudan. And when I went over there, I told the Rwandan military, we have to have women at this training. I know you have women in the Rwandan military, and I want some of them to be part of this training. Because I knew in the past that it had been mostly men who came to these things, because they were in the high officer positions. I said, I really want some women. So we did have some women in our training. They were fairly quiet. They were a little bit overawed because they were in the room with much higher ranking men, but we worked with them and we saw that they had fantastic negotiating skills. And one of the women came up to me and said, you know, I have a real problem. I've already deployed several times abroad with my unit, and I never get sent out on the patrols to the villages where we're supposed to be providing protection. You know, I'm always told to stay back here on base where I'm going to be safer. Now, how can I get my commanding officer to let me take a leadership role and go out on patrol and do the thing that I am here to do, which is to try to help protect civilians? So first I said, okay, well, have you asked to be sent on patrol? And she said, well, no, but I just hope that eventually I would get sent. I said, okay, first thing is ask. And then ask again, and then ask again, and then ask again until it happens. And if your commanding officer says, why should I send you out on a patrol, tell him the value added that you will bring as a woman to this exercise. How will you be able to work with the villagers in that place to help build security? So don't try to talk to him about how it's just your right as a woman or how it's not fair that you're not still on patrol. Tell him how his job is going to be made easier and how the work of the unit is going to be made stronger by what you will contribute. I got an email from her months later, and she said, you know, you were absolutely right. I asked, I was sent out on patrol, and it turned out that I could get into the houses in these Darfur villages that men couldn't get into. Because these are Muslim villages in most cases, and strange men from other countries are not going to be allowed inside people's houses. But I could go in because I was a woman. And I could talk to the women in these houses. They had their ears to the ground. They knew what was going on. They knew when there were threats to the village from insurgents or for warlords or from bandits. They shared the threats with me. I shared them up the chain of command. And we were able to provide much better protection to these villages. That kind of local intelligence is an example of the incredible skills that women can bring to negotiations if they get the chance.
Thank you. That was amazing. I tell you, Anne, the most amazing lesson that Mr. Macho Man taught you was one of the best gifts he ever gave you, unintentionally, though you were seeding and you didn't sleep for months and years, analyzing how you goofed up. You actually benefited because we can see the dedication, the passion, the difference you're making around the world with your teaching negotiation skills to people in other parts of the world. It is so impressive and amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. And Jennifer, when you said, gee, I guess I'm a 40-year-old and therefore guess I'm in the definition of next generation, I don't think there's a definition for next generation. You could be 10s in your teenage years, it could be 20s, 30s, 40s, even 80s presumably, because women are going to live till 120 with all those magic drugs that we learn from the pharmaceutical people at a very cheap rate because we're going to get generic drugs, right? We need to go to the left from Lupin Pharmaceuticals, but you know what? We already are outliving men by at least 5 to 6 years, and if we continue to thrive and grow and get good food and good medicine and good health care, we're going to go conquer the world. I know she said the time was up, so which means we have a minute. We're ready for questions. We'll take a couple of questions. Okay?
Hello, my name is Luby Esmail.
Oh, Luby, how nice to see you again.
And I'm president of Connecting Cultures. I first want everyone to know about a new organization called America's Unofficial Ambassadors. And this will give Americans a chance to go anywhere around the world for 2 weeks to perhaps even 6 months to do service and to get that international experience that can make all the difference. So I want for everyone to check out America's Unofficial Ambassadors. The other thing is, I'm really glad to hear what you said. Too often women say in order to be successful that they've got to adapt their style to make men comfortable or to be so-called masculine. And I hope through this conference and what we've heard from you all is to embrace our gender endowment, because it is that value add. As I say, the F word that matters the most in doing business internationally, in negotiating, is feelings. And women are great at making people feel respected, feel heard, and every bit of example that you shared, I can tell you that it was the U.S.
Just hold it close, hold it close.
Okay. The last thing I want to share is that it was the U.S.
You're holding it.
It was the U.S. military that called on my company because what did they realize? That the masculine model, the ones that were about the men leading, they didn't get access to the women who were critical in reaching our mission. So over and over again, women are seen as bringing success, whatever it be, a business mission or be it a military one, that the success of women don't let go of what it means. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But the last thing is just to say thank you for this institute, because once again you make us all feel very proud and to remember what it is to be a great woman and leader.
Thank you very much, Luby. Thank you. If you listened in her introduction, she did say she's heading up an organization called Connecting Cultures, which is also, I'm guessing, available on the internet, where people can find out more information about the wonderful work that you do in making people more sensitive and aware of the different cultures and how to unite people. It's a lot like the work that we've done. And Luby has spoken, for those of you, the 20-30% here, has spoken in prior panels and just been amazing at what she does. Questions? Yeah? We can get you a speaker just to be sure. I'm not sure if we're recording this conference or session. Are we recording the whole thing or no? We are, so we need you on speaker.
Hello, I'm Linda Stevenson. I'm Senior Vice President, Women's Business Development at NCIV, and I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania. This is my first time here, and I hope it's not my last. This has been just great. But I want to follow up on something that Ann had said about, women don't ask. There is a book out by Dr. Linda Babcock, Women Don't Ask. And I'll tell you what, back when I heard her speak in Pittsburgh, I was an AVP, had been flat forever. I heard her speak about women don't ask, and that is true. And she tells you about that women actually lose over $1 million in income over their lifetime because that first negotiation, that first job, they don't ask. I heard her speak. I asked. I'm now a senior vice president because I kept asking. So read the book. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. I think we'll try to do one last question because I know people are getting hungry and lunch, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. I'll tell you what, you got the microphone, you lucked out. The rest of you, you're more than welcome to come in and speak with us. And we'll take it from there because we don't want to keep the last. The most important thing in speaking is never keep hungry people waiting for food too long.
Thank you. Janice Riley, and I mentioned 2 things. I'm Director of Business Development at Owen Software, which is an academic and career planning software for STEM. So anybody who wants to get their daughters into STEM, come see me and I'll tell you more. Secondly, I am launching a CAST Foundation. It's a nonprofit focused on doing microenterprise in impoverished areas, whether it's West Virginia, the Appalachians, or I'm actually going to Dominican Republic next month. And that was one of the questions I had is, how do you recommend mentoring women, mentoring people in general, of, whether it's younger, it's the next generation, or it's, people older than us? How do we mentor them, based on our knowledge of all the leaders that have spoken so far? What traits, what characteristics, beyond the ones we mentioned, it's like, what aspects? Because I think one of the biggest things we need to do, one of the things that I've heard so far is that people aren't successful, especially in impoverished areas, because there's no mentoring going on, there's no coaching. And I think that's one of the reasons why women are now battling, because men have been coaches for centuries.
That's such an amazing question, and I ask myself that every day as I work, especially with these first generation students who are so hungry and so dedicated, and they have so much heart to give. However, they don't quite yet know how to present themselves professionally. And so they'll get ready for their first job interview, and maybe they'll be dressed in a way which is very beautiful, but which is perhaps not as conservative as it needs to be for a first job interview. Or they become so, I'll do these sample interviews with them, and they'll become so eager to tell their story that it just comes pouring out of them, almost incoherently. And what they need is a mentor who will show them how to center themselves, find themselves, and present themselves with poise, with assurance, not with arrogance, but with that kind of quiet confidence that speaks volumes. And I have found that when our students are able to be paired with alums or with young professionals, it is like magic. Simply that very simple thing of how do you present yourself. It seems superficial, but it's incredibly important.
Thank you.
Just a note on that is I think honesty and not trying to walk on eggshells. I think being very forthcoming, because you're just telling them what they want to hear. You're not necessarily helping them. So, as I've mentored young people, I've just been very direct and sort of telling them how it is.
Wonderful. Listen, actually my boss here, Deb Keelty, the executive director, president you heard from WTCI, said the two people who had raised their hands and who didn't get their questions, we will actually allow you to briefly ask your question, and hopefully we can answer it very quickly for both of you. So I could see the disappointed look, and we women don't disappoint each other. Let's just wait 10 seconds.
I'm Laura Bodie, and I'm the president of an NGO that does leadership training for young women around the world. And we have a formal mentoring program, so I can't see if you needed one over there, but if you'd like a copy of the curriculum, we can provide. The reason I was eager to talk is because these girls really need all of you. We've been in 50 countries, 5 continents, Africa and Kenya. We see the worst. We see female genital mutilation. We see girls that are sex trafficking in Cambodia. We see young child brides. But then what we also see is the best. We see this young woman who is in a brothel, has gotten out, and has now started a foundation herself at age 18 to help get other kids out of the brothel. What we do is we train in countries in various places, but then we bring like the top ones here to Washington, D.C. for training. Like this girl's from Afghanistan, there's a girl from Kenya, Georgian twins, and this is where we could really help you. We take them into Washington, D.C., and they get to meet inspirational role models. Like we meet with the women ambassadors, have luncheon with the women senators and congressmen. However, what they really need most is what I've heard so many of you talking about, is that personal attention from another woman who can guide them, give them advice, and basically be their support system, saying, you can do it. So if any of you are interested in being mentors or in being speakers at the program, I would love to talk with you, because you really are all the ones that truly transform their lives.
What's your website?
It's IL2L. Letter I, it's for I Live to Lead, with a number 2.
Wonderful. We'll remember I Live to Lead more than IL2L. Thank you very much for sharing. Two are very interconnected, aren't they? Loving being a good, true leader. Yeah, we had one other person who had raised their hand, or did the person get too hungry and decide, oh, okay, that's right.
Hi, I'm Grace from the 5 Group, and while I believe I'm a corporate entrepreneur, I'm not yet at my peak. And I hear a lot of things about mentoring here, and I think it's very important not to go necessarily looking for a mentor, but all you wonderful women here going to find somebody to mentor. It's very hard to realize your potentials at points when you see women at the top who aren't willing to talk to you and aren't willing to give you the advice and the assistance that you need. So go back to your own offices, go back to your own homes, and look for that person that needs your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much.